The sky above Earth turned dark, not because of clouds or nightfall, but because of something far more terrifying. Thousands of ships, sleek and metallic, filled the atmosphere like a swarm of locusts. They were alien vessels, 9,900 of them, to be exact, and they had arrived with one purpose: conquest. The people of Earth watched in stunned silence as the massive fleet hovered ominously, casting long shadows over cities, towns, and fields. No one knew what to do. Panic spread faster than any news report could contain it. In Chicago, Daniel Carter stood on the roof of his apartment building, staring up at the sky. His hands trembled slightly as he gripped the railing. A mechanic by trade, Daniel wasn't used to thinking about things like invasions or wars. He fixed cars, not spaceships. But now, none of that mattered. The world he knew was slipping away, replaced by fear and uncertainty. What are we supposed to do? He muttered under his breath, though no one was there to hear him. Across the country, in Seattle, Rachel Monroe sat in her classroom, surrounded by empty desks. School had been canceled hours ago, but she hadn't left yet. She stared out the window, watching the strange shapes move across the horizon. Her mind raced with questions. Who were these aliens? What did they want? And why now? As a teacher, Rachel spent her days shaping young minds, preparing them for the future. But what kind of future was this? The first sign of communication came just after sunset. A voice boomed from every television, radio, and phone speaker worldwide. It wasn't human. It couldn't be. But somehow, everyone understood it. "We are the Krill," the voice said, cold and mechanical. "Your resistance is futile. Surrender your planet, or face annihilation." The words sent chills down spines everywhere. For a moment, the world seemed frozen in time. Daniel heard the message while pacing his living room. He stopped mid-step, his heart pounding. "Surrender," he whispered, just like that. Anger bubbled inside him, mixing with fear. He thought of his sister, who lived in New York, and wondered if she was safe. He thought of his job, his friends, his life, all of it hanging by a thread. He clenched his fists. "No way," he said aloud. "I'm not giving up." Rachel felt a similar surge of defiance. She grabbed her bag and headed outside, where groups of people huddled together, talking in hushed tones. Some cried, others shouted angrily. A man nearby held a baseball bat like it might actually protect him against an alien invasion. Rachel shook her head. People were scared, and fear made them irrational. Still, she couldn't blame them. She was scared too. As the hours passed, governments scrambled to respond. Emergency broadcasts urged people to stay calm and follow evacuation protocols, but the instructions were vague and often contradictory. In some places, military forces mobilized, though it was clear their weapons were woefully inadequate against the advanced technology of the Krill. Videos surfaced online showing attempts to shoot down the alien ships, only for the bullets to bounce harmlessly off invisible shields. That night, Daniel decided to take matters into his own hands. He rummaged through his toolbox, gathering whatever he thought might come in handy. Wrenches, screwdrivers, even spare car parts. He didn't know exactly what he'd need, but he figured anything was better than nothing. As he worked, he thought about his father, a veteran who always said, "You don't back down when things get tough." Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe he'd inherited more from his dad than he realized. Meanwhile, Rachel joined a group organizing a shelter in an old warehouse. She helped carry supplies and comfort frightened children, doing her best to keep busy. When someone asked why she wasn't trying to leave town, she simply replied, "Someone has to stay and help." Deep down, she knew running wouldn't solve anything. If these aliens wanted Earth, they'd have to fight for it. By dawn, the initial shock had worn off, replaced by grim determination. The Krill hadn't attacked yet, but everyone knew it was only a matter of time. Daniel tightened the strap on his makeshift toolkit and glanced at the sky one last time before heading out. Rachel hugged a little girl goodbye and stepped outside, taking the deep breath. Whatever happened next, they would face it together, or not at all. The morning sun struggled to break through the thick haze created by the alien ships. People moved cautiously, glancing up at the sky every few seconds, as if expecting doom to descend at any moment. The Krill hadn't attacked yet, but their presence loomed over everything like a storm waiting to strike. Daniel Carter walked briskly down the empty streets of Chicago, his toolkit slung over his shoulder. He wasn't sure where he was going, only that staying still felt worse than moving. As he passed a convenience store, he noticed someone inside. Through the glass window, he saw a young woman rummaging through shelves, grabbing cans of food and stuffing them into a bag. She looked up and caught his eye. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then she stepped outside, holding a crowbar in one hand. "You planning to steal something too?" she asked, her tone sharp but not unkind. "Not stealing," Daniel replied, raising his hand slightly. "Just looking for supplies." The woman nodded, lowering the crowbar. "Name's Elena Vega. You look like you're trying to do something useful." "Daniel Carter," he said, shaking her outstretched hand. "And yeah, I'm figuring it out as I go." Elena smirked. "Well, good luck with that. Most people around here are either hiding or running. Not many are thinking straight." Daniel hesitated before asking, "What about you? What's your plan?" Elena glanced around, then leaned closer. "I've been studying these aliens for years. They'd visited Earth before, just never this openly. Their technology has weaknesses. If we can figure them out, maybe we stand a chance." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Years? How'd you even know they existed?" "That's a long story," Elena said, shrugging. "But right now, we don't have time for it. Come on, I'll show you what I mean." In Seattle, Rachel Monroe worked tirelessly at the makeshift shelter. More people had arrived overnight, fleeing their homes in search of safety. The warehouse was crowded and noisy, filled with the sounds of crying children, whispered prayers, and heated arguments. Rachel did her best to keep order, handing out water bottles and blankets while reassuring those who needed it most. A man approached her, his face pale with fear. "They're going to kill us all, aren't they?" he asked, his voice trembling. Rachel forced a smile. "We don't know that for sure. We just have to stay calm and stick together." "But what if they attack? What then?" She didn't have an answer. Instead, she patted his arm gently. "One step at a time," she said softly. Later that afternoon, a soldier entered the shelter. His uniform was dusty and his expression grim. He called Rachel aside. "We need volunteers to help evacuate people further inland. It's not safe here anymore." Rachel frowned. "Why? What's happening?" "The military thinks the aliens will target major cities first. We're telling everyone to move away from urban areas." Rachel nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll help spread the word." Back in Chicago, Elena led Daniel to an abandoned garage where she'd set up a small workspace. Tools and wires were scattered across a table, along with pieces of strange metal that looked alien in origin. "Found this after one of their drones crashed last night," Elena explained, picking up a jagged shard. "It's part of their shielding system." Daniel examined it carefully. "So what does it tell you?" "It tells me they're not invincible," Elena said, her eyes lighting up. "Their shields rely on some kind of energy frequency. If we can disrupt that frequency, we might be able to disable their ships, or at least damage them." Daniel blinked. "That sounds complicated." "It is," Elena admitted, "but it's our best shot. Problem is, I can't do it alone." For a moment, Daniel considered walking away. This wasn't his fight. Not really. He was just a mechanic, not a scientist or a soldier. But then he thought about his sister, his friends, and all the people counting on someone to stand up. Taking a deep breath, he nodded. "All right, I'm in." By evening, tensions were rising everywhere. News reports showed chaotic scenes of riots and looting in cities across the globe. Governments issued conflicting orders, leaving people confused and scared. In New York, Rachel's sister sent her a text. Asterisk, we're heading to Vermont. Stay safey asterisk. Rachel read the message over and over, wishing she could join them. But she couldn't leave. Not yet. That night, the first real sign of aggression came. A low hum filled the air, growing louder until it became almost unbearable. Then, without warning, beams of light shot down from the alien ships, striking random targets. Buildings collapsed, fires erupted, and screams echoed through the streets. The invasion had begun. Daniel and Elena watched from the garage as explosions lit up the horizon. "This is it," Elena said quietly. "No turning back now." Daniel tightened his grip on a wrench. "Let's make sure they regret coming here." The first wave of the alien attack hit hard and fast. Beams of blinding light rained down from the sky, striking buildings, bridges, and roads with terrifying precision. The ground shook as explosions erupted, sending plumes of smoke and debris into the air. People ran in every direction, screaming, trying to find cover. It was chaos. Pure, unrelenting chaos. In Chicago, Daniel Carter and Elena Vega barely escaped the initial assault. They had been working in the garage when a beam struck a nearby building, collapsing it in seconds. The shockwave knocked them off their feet and sent shards of glass flying everywhere. Daniel scrambled to his knees, coughing through the thick dust that filled the air. "We need to move," he shouted, grabbing Elena's arm and pulling her toward the door. Outside, the scene was apocalyptic. Fires burned unchecked, and the streets were littered with rubble. Cars lay overturned, some still smoldering from the heat of the blasts. A woman stumbled past, clutching a bleeding wound on her arm, her face streaked with soot and tears. Daniel looked around, his heart pounding. "Where do we go?" he asked, but Elena didn't answer right away. "This way," she finally said, pointing toward an alleyway. "We can't stay out in the open." They moved quickly, sticking close to walls and avoiding the main streets. Every few minutes, another explosion would rock the area, forcing them to duck for cover. At one point, they hid behind a dumpster as a group of panicked civilians sprinted by, pursued by a low-flying alien drone. The machine hovered silently, its sleek surface glinting in the firelight, before unleashing a burst of energy that sent the runners sprawling to the ground. Daniel clenched his fists, anger boiling inside him. But there was nothing he could do. Not yet. Meanwhile, in Seattle, Rachel Monroe huddled with a small group of survivors inside the warehouse shelter. The building shook violently as blasts echoed in the distance. "Stay low," she shouted, ushering people toward the back rooms where the walls were thicker. Children cried, and adults whispered prayers, their faces pale with fear. A loud crash came from the front of the building, followed by the sound of splintering wood. Someone yelled, "They're here." Rachel froze for a moment, then grabbed a metal pipe lying nearby. She wasn't sure what she'd do with it, but she refused to stand aside and do nothing. Peering cautiously around the corner, she saw two alien drones hovering near the entrance, their glowing red eyes scanning the room. "Turn off the lights," Rachel hissed, and someone obeyed, plunging the space into darkness. The drones paused, their sensors apparently confused by the sudden lack of visibility. Rachel held her breath, gripping the pipe tightly. After what felt like an eternity, the machines drifted away, retreating into the night. The group let out a collective sigh of relief, though no one spoke. They all knew this was only the beginning. Back in Chicago, Daniel and Elena reached a partially collapsed subway station. It was dark and damp, but it offered some protection from the destruction above. As they caught their breath, Elena pulled out the shard of alien metal she'd been studying earlier. "If we're going to fight back," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances, "we need to figure out how to use this." Daniel nodded, wiping sweat from his forehead. "What do you need?" "Tools," Elena replied. "And time." "Lots of it." Daniel glanced at his toolkit, which he'd managed to hang on to during their escape. "I've got tools," he said, "but time. That's something we don't have." Alina smiled faintly. "Then we'll make it work." As the hours dragged on, the attacks continued without pause. The aliens seemed relentless, methodically destroying everything in their path. Yet amidst the devastation, small acts of courage began to emerge. Neighbors helped each other find safety. Strangers shared food and water. And in hidden corners of the city, people like Daniel and Alina worked tirelessly to turn scraps of alien technology into weapons of resistance. By dawn, the world looked vastly different. Skyscrapers had crumbled, neighborhoods were reduced to ash, and countless lives had been lost. But not everyone had given up. In the ruins of Chicago and Seattle, and cities across the globe, survivors banded together, determined to fight for what remained of their home. For Daniel, Rachel, and Alina, the battle was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. The days following the first wave of attacks were a blur of smoke, fear, and determination. Survivors began to organize themselves into groups, realizing that they stood a better chance if they worked together. In Chicago, Daniel Carter and Alina Vega found themselves at the center of one such group, a ragtag collection of people who had lost everything but still clung to hope. They set up a base in the abandoned subway station, using whatever supplies they could scavenge from nearby stores and homes. Alina became the de facto leader, her knowledge of alien technology giving her an edge. She spent hours tinkering with a shard of alien metal, trying to understand how it worked. Daniel stayed by her side, offering his skills as a mechanic to help build makeshift weapons. "If we can replicate this shielding frequency," Alina explained one night, holding up the glowing fragment, "we might be able to disrupt their systems." "But how?" Daniel asked, scratching his head. "We don't have fancy labs or equipment." "We'll improvise," Alina replied firmly. "That's what humans do best." Word spread about their efforts, and more people joined the group. Some brought useful skills. Medics, engineers, even a former electrician named Sam. Others simply offered muscle or moral support. Among them was Marcus Hale, a grizzled ex-soldier who had seen combat overseas. He took charge of organizing patrols and defenses, ensuring the group wasn't caught off guard again. In Seattle, Rachel Monroe faced similar challenges. The warehouse shelter had become overcrowded, with new arrivals streaming in daily. Food and water were running low, and tempers flared as resources dwindled. Rachel did her best to keep everyone calm, rationing supplies fairly and encouraging cooperation. But tensions mounted when a man named Greg accused her of favoritism. "Why does your family get extra rations?" he demanded loudly during a meeting. "It's not like that," Rachel said, keeping her voice steady. "Everyone gets the same amount. I'm just trying to make sure no one goes hungry." Greg glared at her, but didn't argue further. Still, Rachel knew she couldn't afford to lose the trust of the group. She called a vote to elect leaders, hoping transparency would ease suspicions. To her surprise, she was chosen unanimously. It was a responsibility she hadn't asked for, but one she accepted without hesitation. As both groups worked to survive, news trickled in about other resistance cells forming across the country. A radio broadcast from somewhere in Colorado mentioned a successful ambush on an alien patrol, giving everyone a small spark of hope. Inspired, Daniel suggested reaching out to these other groups. "If we team up, we can hit them harder," he told Alina. She agreed but warned against overconfidence. "We're still outnumbered and outgunned. Every move has to count." Their first test came sooner than expected. One evening, while Marcus led a scouting mission above ground, they spotted a lone alien drone hovering near a collapsed building. It seemed to be scanning for survivors. Marcus signaled for silence, then motioned for his team to surround it. Using a crude EMP device rigged by Daniel and Alina, they managed to disable the drone, causing it to crash to the ground. Back at the subway station, the group celebrated cautiously. For the first time, They felt like they had a real chance, but their victory was short-lived. Later that night, a second wave of attacks began, fiercer than the first. The aliens targeted shelters and gathering points, clearly adapting to human tactics. Rachel's warehouse came under heavy fire, forcing her group to flee into the woods. Many didn't make it. Despite the losses, the resolve of those left behind only grew stronger. In Chicago, Elena finalized plans for a larger-scale weapon based on the alien tech. In Seattle, Rachel coordinated with neighboring cells to share intelligence and resources. And everywhere, ordinary people continued to fight back, not because they believed they could win, but because surrender was no longer an option. The war was far from over, but humanity had found its footing. Together, they vowed to protect what little remained of their world, even if it meant sacrificing everything. Tensions within the resistance groups began to rise as the days dragged on. The constant threat of alien attacks weighed heavily on everyone, and the strain was starting to show. In Chicago, cracks formed in the unity that had once held Daniel Carter's group together. Some members believed it was time to negotiate with the aliens, hoping for a truce or even surrender if it meant saving lives. Others, like Marcus Hale, insisted they keep fighting no matter the cost. "We can't trust them," Marcus argued during a heated meeting in the subway station. His voice echoed off the damp walls as he paced back and forth. "They came here to take our planet, not talk." "But how long can we keep this up?" countered Sam, the former electrician. "We're running out of food, water, and people. If we don't find another way, we'll all be dead soon." Elena Vega listened silently, her arms crossed over her chest. She agreed with Marcus. They couldn't give up, but she also understood Sam's concerns. Resources were dwindling, and morale was fragile. When the discussion turned to whether they should risk using their limited supplies to build more EMP devices, Elena finally spoke up. "If we stop fighting, everything we've done so far will be for nothing," she said firmly. "But we need to be smart about it. Every move counts." Daniel nodded in agreement. He trusted Elena's judgment, but he could see the doubt in some of the others' eyes. A few muttered under their breath, clearly unhappy with her leadership. One man, a wiry guy named Pete, stood up abruptly. "Maybe we should consider other options," he said, glaring at Elena. "How do we know you're not leading us into a trap?" The room fell silent. Elena stared at him, her expression unreadable. "What are you implying?" she asked coolly. Pete shrugged. "You showed up out of nowhere, talking about alien tech and frequencies. How do we know you're really on our side?" Daniel stepped forward, his jaw tightening. "She saved my life, and she's been helping all of us. That's enough for me." Before the argument could escalate further, Marcus intervened. "Enough," he barked. "We don't have time for this. We stick to the plan. No negotiations, no surrender." Despite his words, the damage was done. The group split into factions, with some siding with Marcus and others following Sam's call for peace talks. Daniel stayed loyal to Elena, believing in her vision, but he couldn't shake the feeling that their division made them weaker. Meanwhile, Elena worked tirelessly to finish the next-generation EMP device, knowing it might be their only chance to turn the tide. In Seattle, Rachel Monroe faced a different kind of betrayal. Her group had managed to regroup after fleeing the warehouse, setting up camp in a dense forest outside the city. It was safer there, but tensions ran high. Supplies were scarce, and tempers flared easily. One night, Rachel discovered that someone had stolen food from the shared stash, a serious offense when everyone was already struggling to survive. She confronted the thief the next morning, a young man named Carl, who looked ashamed but defiant. "I did what I had to do," he snapped. "My little brother hasn't eaten in 2 days." Rachel sighed, torn between anger and sympathy. "Stealing isn't the answer," she said softly. "If we start turning on each other, we lose everything." Carl didn't respond, but the incident sowed distrust among the group. People began hiding their own supplies, fearing they'd be taken away. Rachel tried to hold things together, organizing hunting parties and teaching survival skills, but it was clear the group was unraveling. Then came the ambush. An informant, someone from within Rachel's group, had leaked their location to the aliens. Early one morning, a swarm of drones descended upon the camp, catching everyone off guard. Chaos erupted as people scrambled to escape. Rachel grabbed a child who had fallen behind and pushed him toward safety, shouting for others to run. By the time the attack ended, half the group was gone, either captured or killed. Rachel sat amidst the wreckage, her hands trembling as she clutched a broken piece of wood. She felt responsible, though she knew there was nothing she could have done differently. Still, the guilt lingered, heavy and suffocating. Back in Chicago, Daniel received word of the ambush through a radio transmission. He clenched his fists, anger burning inside him. "We can't let this happen again," he muttered to Alina. "We have to hit them before they hit us." Alina nodded, her face grim. "Then we better hurry." The resistance was fractured, battered, and bruised, but it wasn't broken. Not yet. The resistance groups were battered, but they refused to give up. In Chicago, Daniel Carter and Alina Vega worked around the clock to complete their new EMP device. The prototype was larger and more powerful than anything they'd built before, designed to disable multiple alien ships at once. It wasn't perfect. Alina admitted it might only work once, but it was their best shot at striking a meaningful blow against the invaders. Daniel spent hours assembling the device, his hands calloused from gripping tools and wires. He didn't complain. He knew how important this was. "If this works," he said one night while soldering a circuit, "we might actually have a chance." Alina nodded, though her expression remained serious. "It's risky. If they catch us setting it up, we're done for." "We'll make sure they don't," Daniel replied firmly. Meanwhile, Rachel Monroe struggled to hold her group together after the ambush. Many survivors had scattered into the wilderness, too scared to stay in one place for long. Those who remained were wary of each other, haunted by the betrayal that had led to the attack. Rachel tried to rally them, reminding them of why they were fighting. "We can't let fear divide us," she said during a quiet meeting under the stars. "If we do, they win." Her words resonated with some, but others weren't convinced. One woman named Lisa spoke up, her voice trembling. "What's the point? They're stronger than us. We're just delaying the inevitable." Rachel looked at her, her eyes steady. "Maybe. But if we don't try, we've already lost." Despite the doubts, Rachel pushed forward. She used her knowledge of the area to map out safe zones and plan routes for evacuation. She also started teaching basic survival skills, showing people how to find food and water in the wild. Slowly, trust began to rebuild, not fully, but enough to keep the group functioning. Back in Chicago, tensions between Marcus Hale's faction and Sam's peace-seeking group reached a breaking point. During a supply run, Sam decided to take matters into his own hands. He approached an alien patrol alone, carrying a white flag made from a torn shirt. Daniel and Marcus watched from a distance, horrified. "What is he doing?" Daniel whispered. "Getting himself killed," Marcus growled. Sam shouted something toward the aliens, his voice shaky but determined. For a moment, it seemed like they might listen. Then, without warning, one of the drones fired, vaporizing him instantly. The sight sent shockwaves through both factions. Sam's death silenced any talk of negotiation, uniting the group, at least temporarily, under Marcus's leadership. With their forces somewhat restored, Daniel and Alina prepared for their mission. They chose an old skyscraper as the launch site, its height giving them a clear line of sight to several alien vessels hovering nearby. The climb was treacherous, especially with the bulky EMP device strapped to Daniel's back, but they made it to the rooftop undetected. As they set up the device, Alina glanced at Daniel. "Ready for this?" He took a deep breath. "No, but let's do it anyway." They activated the EMP, its hum growing louder as it charged. Below them, the city lay eerily quiet, the streets empty except for the occasional drone patrol. Then, with a blinding flash, the device discharged. The sky lit up as several alien ships faltered, their shields flickering and failing. Cheers erupted from the resistance members watching below, but Daniel and Alina didn't celebrate yet. They knew the aliens would retaliate, and they were right. Within minutes, reinforcements arrived, swarming the building. Daniel and Alina barely escaped, sliding down a rope as explosions rocked the rooftop behind them. Though injured and exhausted, they returned to the subway station as heroes. Their success gave the group hope, proving that the aliens weren't invincible. In Seattle, Rachel heard about the EMP strike over the radio. She smiled faintly, feeling a spark of optimism for the first time in days. The fight was far from over, but small victories like this reminded her why they kept going. Humanity was still standing, and as long as they had courage, they wouldn't fall easily. The victory from the EMP strike in Chicago gave the resistance a much-needed boost, but it came at a cost. The aliens retaliated swiftly, launching targeted attacks on areas they suspected of harboring rebels. In Chicago, Daniel Carter and his group were forced to abandon their subway station base after drones traced their movements. They relocated to an old factory on the outskirts of the city, its crumbling walls offering little protection, but at least keeping them hidden for now. Alina Vega worked tirelessly to repair the EMP device, which had been damaged during their escape. "We got lucky last time," she told Daniel as she soldered wires together. "But we can't rely on luck forever." Daniel nodded, leaning against a rusted workbench. His body ached from days of constant movement, but he didn't complain. "What's the plan if we can't fix it?" "We adapt," Alina said simply. "That's what humans do." Meanwhile, Rachel Monroe's group in Seattle faced new challenges. After the ambush, many survivors refused to settle in one place, fearing another betrayal. Rachel understood their fear, but knew they couldn't keep running forever. She called a meeting under the cover of night, speaking softly so her voice wouldn't carry. "We need to stick together," she urged. "If we scatter, we're easier targets." Some agreed, but others remained hesitant. One man, a farmer named Tom, finally spoke up. "What's the point? Every time we try to fight back, they hit us harder." Rachel looked him in the eye. "Because giving up isn't an option. If we stop fighting, we lose everything: our homes, our families, our future." Her words struck a chord, and slowly, people began to nod. They decided to set up a temporary camp in a dense forest, using natural barriers to hide from alien patrols. Rachel took charge of organizing defenses, teaching everyone how to set traps and use makeshift weapons. It wasn't much, but it was something. Back in Chicago, Marcus Hale led a daring raid on an alien supply depot. Using intel gathered by scouts, they managed to sneak into the facility undetected. Inside, they found crates filled with strange equipment. Tools that looked like they could be used for mining or processing resources. "They're not just here to conquer," Marcus muttered, examining a glowing crystal-like object. "They're stripping the planet." The group loaded as much of the equipment as they could carry, hoping Alina could figure out how it worked. As they made their escape, they triggered alarms, drawing a swarm of drones. Marcus stayed behind to hold them off, shouting for the others to run. Daniel hesitated, torn between obeying orders and helping his friend. "Go," Marcus barked, firing his rifle. Reluctantly, Daniel turned and fled. Marcus's sacrifice bought the group precious time, but it left a deep scar. When they returned to the factory, Alina immediately went to work analyzing the stolen equipment. She discovered that the crystals emitted a frequency similar to the one used in the alien shields. "If we can replicate this," she explained, holding up a shard, "we might be able to create a jamming signal, a way to disrupt their entire fleet." The idea reignited hope within the group, but it also brought fresh fears. Building such a device would require materials they didn't have and time they couldn't spare. Still, they pressed on, knowing they had no other choice. In Seattle, Rachel received word of Marcus's death through a coded radio transmission. She sat alone by the fire that night, staring into the flames. The weight of leadership felt heavier than ever, but she reminded herself why she kept going. Humanity had already lost so much, but not its spirit. As dawn broke, both groups prepared for what lay ahead. The war was far from over, but small victories and shared determination kept them moving forward. Together, they vowed to protect what little remained of their world, even if it meant risking everything. The Resistance knew they needed more than scraps of alien tech to turn the tide. In Seattle, Rachel Monroe and Elena Vega hatched a bold plan: infiltrate an alien base disguised as prisoners. They hoped to gather intelligence and uncover weaknesses that could help humanity strike back. It was dangerous, but both women agreed it was worth the risk. Rachel wasn't a soldier or a spy. She was just a teacher, but desperation had changed her. She stood outside the forest camp, adjusting the tattered clothes she'd chosen for her disguise. "You don't have to do this," said Tom, the farmer who had doubted their cause before, but now looked at Rachel with admiration. "Yes, I do," Rachel replied firmly. "If we don't take chances, we'll never win." Elena joined her moments later, her face smeared with dirt to look worn and defeated. She carried a small bag filled with tools hidden inside hollowed-out pieces of wood. "Ready?" she asked, though her voice betrayed her nervousness. "As ready as I'll ever be," Rachel said with a shaky smile. They set off toward the alien base, moving cautiously through the ruins of the city. The structure loomed ahead, a massive dome surrounded by drones and patrols. To get captured, they deliberately stumbled into an open area where alien guards were stationed. Within seconds, they were surrounded, bright lights shining down on them. Neither woman resisted as they were dragged inside. Inside the base, the air was cold and sterile, the walls glowing faintly with an eerie blue light. Rachel and Elena were taken to separate holding cells, but they had planned for this. Using a tiny blade hidden in her sleeve, Rachel picked the lock of her cell door while pretending to cry. Once free, she crept through the corridors, avoiding patrols and searching for Elena. When she finally found her friend, Elena was already hard at work. She had dismantled part of her cell's wall panel, exposing wires and circuits beneath. "I think I've found something," Elena whispered, showing Rachel a strange device. "It looks like some kind of communication hub." Working together, they downloaded data onto a portable drive Elena had smuggled in. As they worked, they overheard conversations between the aliens, not in words, but in clicks and hums transmitted through their suits. The sounds sent chills down Rachel's spine, but she focused on the task at hand. Their luck ran out when a patrol entered the room unexpectedly. Elena shoved the drive into Rachel's hands. "Run," she shouted, grabbing a fallen guard's weapon. "I'll hold them off." "No," Rachel protested, but Elena pushed her toward the exit. With tears streaming down her face, Rachel fled, clutching the drive tightly. Behind her, she heard gunfire and explosions before the sounds faded into silence. By the time she reached the edge of the base, her legs burned, and her lungs felt like they might burst. She collapsed behind a pile of rubble, gasping for air. Back in Chicago, Daniel Carter received the stolen data via a secure transmission. He handed it to one of the Resistance engineers, who began decoding it immediately. What they discovered chilled them to the bone. The aliens weren't just harvesting Earth's resources. They were conducting experiments on humans, testing ways to adapt Earth's atmosphere to suit their biology. "They're planning to wipe us out completely," Daniel muttered, his fists clenched. No coexistence, no second chances. Elena's sacrifice weighed heavily on everyone, especially Rachel. When she returned to the forest camp, she barely spoke, retreating to a quiet corner to grieve. But grief quickly turned to resolve. Elena had given her life, so humanity could fight back, and Rachel wouldn't let that be in vain. The Resistance prepared for its next move, using the intel to target key alien operations. Though weakened, they refused to give up. Each loss fueled their determination. reminding them what was at stake. The battle was far from over, but with every step forward, they moved closer to reclaiming their world. The Resistance had one final chance to strike back. Using the data stolen from the alien base, they learned that the invaders' entire fleet was controlled by a central command ship, the mothership. If they could destroy it, the rest of the fleet would fall into disarray. It was a desperate plan, but it was all they had left. In Chicago, Daniel Carter stood in front of the group, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was about to ask. "We're going after the mothership," he said, holding up a crude map of the alien formation. "It's heavily guarded, and we'll need everything we've got to pull this off." Marcus Hale, who had survived his earlier mission thanks to sheer luck, nodded grimly. "What's the plan?" Daniel pointed to a retrofitted fighter jet they'd salvaged from an old military base. "I'll fly this thing straight into their defenses. With Alina's EMP tech built into the plane, I can disable the shields long enough for us to hit the core." "And if you don't make it?" Marcus asked, his tone sharp. "Then you finish the job," Daniel replied without hesitation. "No matter what happens, the mothership has to go down." Rachel Monroe, now fully recovered from her ordeal, joined the planning session via radio. Her voice crackled over the line as she spoke. "We'll handle ground operations here. We'll draw their forces away from the sky, so you have a clear shot." Her words carried confidence, but inside, Rachel felt hollow. She still mourned Alina's death, but she knew there was no time for grief, not when the fate of humanity hung in the balance. She organized teams to create diversions across the city, setting fires and triggering decoy explosions to confuse the aliens. As the day of the attack approached, tension filled the air. Daniel spent hours prepping the jet, checking every wire and bolt to ensure it wouldn't fail mid-flight. He thought about his sister, wondering if she was safe somewhere far away. He also thought about Alina, whose bravery had made this moment possible. "This is for you," he whispered, tightening the last strap on his harness. The morning of the assault dawned gray and cold. Resistance fighters gathered in silence, some clutching weapons, others holding hands. Rachel led a prayer before sending everyone to their posts. "For Earth," she said simply, her voice firm. "For all of us." When the signal came, Daniel climbed into the cockpit, his heart pounding. The engines roared to life as he sped down the makeshift runway, dodging debris and enemy fire. Above him, the alien fleet loomed like a swarm of metal insects. His first target was a patrol of drones guarding the outer perimeter. With pinpoint accuracy, he launched missiles loaded with EMP charges, disabling them instantly. On the ground, Rachel's team executed their part of the plan flawlessly. Explosions erupted throughout the city, drawing alien reinforcements toward fake targets. Drones swarmed the area, leaving the path to the mothership temporarily clear. But the aliens quickly adapted. As Daniel approached the mothership, waves of enemy fighters closed in around him. Bullets tore through the jet's wings, and alarms blared in the cockpit. Still, he pressed on, knowing failure wasn't an option. Finally, he reached the mothership's shield barrier. Activating the EMP, he watched as the glowing field flickered and died. For a brief moment, the massive vessel was vulnerable. Daniel locked onto its core and fired everything he had. The impact sent shockwaves rippling through the sky as the mothership began to break apart. Back on the ground, Rachel saw the explosion from miles away. Tears streamed down her face as cheers erupted around her. The tide had turned, but at a terrible cost. Many lives had been lost, including Daniel's. Though victorious, the survivors knew the road ahead would be hard. Cities lay in ruins, and millions were gone. But amidst the ashes, hope remained. Together, they vowed to rebuild, and to remember those who had given everything to save Earth. The destruction of the mothership marked a turning point in the war, but it wasn't the end. The alien fleet, now leaderless, began to retreat, their ships fleeing Earth's atmosphere one by one. Yet the planet below was left scared and broken, its cities reduced to rubble, and its people scattered. The survivors emerged from hiding, stepping cautiously into a world forever changed. In Chicago, Rachel Monroe stood on the cracked pavement of what used to be a bustling street. Around her, the remnants of the resistance worked tirelessly to clear debris and tend to the wounded. Fires still burned in the distance, sending plumes of smoke into the gray sky. She held a piece of paper in her hands, a list of names. Some were crossed out, others remained untouched. Each name represented someone who had fought for humanity's survival. Many would never come home. Daniel Carter's name was among them. Rachel folded the paper carefully and tucked it into her pocket. She couldn't bring herself to cross his name off. Not yet. Instead, she focused on the task ahead. "We need to gather supplies," she told a group of volunteers nearby. "Food, water, medicine, whatever we can find." The work was exhausting, but no one complained. There was a sense of purpose now, a shared determination to rebuild. Rachel often found herself thinking about Daniel and Alina, remembering their bravery and sacrifice. They had given everything so others could live, and she refused to let their efforts be wasted. Across the country, Marcus Hale led cleanup efforts in Seattle. Though battered and weary, he pushed forward, organizing teams to search for survivors and secure safe zones. He walked through the remains of a school, his boots crunching over shattered glass. Inside a classroom, he found a child's drawing pinned to a bulletin board. It showed stick figures holding hands under a bright sun. For a moment, Marcus allowed himself to imagine a future where such innocence could exist again. News spread slowly, carried by word of mouth and makeshift radios. Survivors in other cities reported similar scenes: devastation, loss, but also resilience. People came together, sharing what little they had and working side by side to create something new from the ruins. In rural areas, farmers planted crops despite uncertain harvests. In urban centers, engineers rigged generators to provide power for hospitals and shelters. Humanity was fragile, but it was alive. Rachel eventually returned to teaching, setting up a small outdoor classroom near the forest camp. Her students were children who had lost parents, homes, and even siblings. At first, they were quiet, their eyes haunted by memories of fire and chaos. But as days turned into weeks, laughter began to return. One boy named Liam brought her a flower he'd picked from the woods. "For you," he said shyly. Rachel smiled, feeling a spark of hope she hadn't felt in months. Still, challenges remained. Alien technology left behind in the retreat posed risks. Some devices were booby-trapped, while others emitted strange radiation. Scientists and engineers worked to study these artifacts, hoping to learn how to neutralize any lingering threats. Meanwhile, questions lingered. Would the aliens return? Had humanity truly won, or merely delayed the inevitable? Rachel didn't dwell on those questions. Instead, she focused on the present. Every brick laid, every meal shared, every life saved was a step toward healing. Late at night, she sat by the fire, staring at the stars. The sky felt different now, emptier without the alien ships, but also full of possibility. One evening, Marcus visited Rachel's camp, bringing news of rebuilding efforts in Seattle. They sat together in silence for a while, watching the flames dance. "Do you think we'll ever go back to how things were?" Marcus asked finally. Rachel shook her head. "No, but maybe that's okay. Maybe we can build something better." Her words stayed with him as he left the next morning. Back in Seattle, Marcus climbed to the top of a hill overlooking the city. From there, he could see both the destruction and the beginnings of renewal. Tents pitched in parks, gardens sprouting in vacant lots, and people moving with purpose. It was far from perfect, but it was progress. The scars of the invasion would never fully heal, and the losses would always weigh heavily. But humanity endured, not because it was invincible, but because it refused to give up. Together, they faced the future, determined to honor those who had fallen by creating a world worth fighting for.